Okay, so here we have my second study, and in this particular research, I again kind of a facetious example here, but I surveyed a group of my students, and I wanted to know how many hours do you study in a week, and they came up with some numbers for me, and I have a big group of numbers here that tells me how many hours people have studied for, and I'm just going to calculate some aggregate statistics here. So I want to know what the average is, or in statistical world we call it the mean. How many participants do I have? Let's look at the outliers here. What was the maximum value? What was the minimum value? And I don't think there's any reason to use sum here, so I'm not going to use that. So let me find the mean, which is also known as the average. And I will choose, and I need to name, let's do this again before we do this. Let's take this group here, and we'll call this my hours, my study hours. We'll give it a range name. Okay. Oops, let's try again. Poor name on my choice. Okay, so there's study hours. All right, so we'll do mean. So it's average. And then study hours. We'll do participants, which will be count. And study hours. We'll do our maximum. And we'll do our minimum. Okay, so one thing we'll note about our data here, we had 29 participants. The mean or the average was about 20 hours a week is what students study in my study. And we found out we had 29 participants, and we had some real variability in data. We had a couple students that were outliers, we'll call them. One has a maximum of 56 hours that week. Another one had a minimum value, which was 2 hours. Some real variability there. All right, that's all helpful and all until we go to visualize our data. And I'll take our data here and let's make a chart of this. Let's see what we can do. We're going to go ahead and make a easy column chart, and I throw that up there. And I look at my values, and honestly, they're not very helpful, are they? Got a bunch of lines going up there, and it doesn't really help me visualize it. So I'm going to go back to this idea of using categorizing our data, and we'll find this quite used quite readily. For instance, when we're looking at ages. So for instance, we group maybe health data based upon age. So we might have the 0 to 17 age, then the 18 to 35, and 35 to 50, and then 50 to 65, and 65 years and older. And we're able to group people and maybe some of the effects of various diseases or exercise programs or whatever based upon, well, groupings of age. And so let's do the same thing here. And if I have my maximum value is 56, my minimum value is 2, let's go ahead and create groupings. And if I just do a little bit of quick math on that, that's going to give me 54. If we take 54 and divide it into 5 categories, that's basically about 10 per category. So I'm going to create categories here. So I'm going to have a category that's going to go from 2 to 12. Whoops. I studied 2 to 12 hours. And what I did there is I made that into a let me do that. So from 2 to 12 hours, 13 to 22 hours, 23 hours to 33. Let's make that a little more. We'll make it 34. And here we'll do 35 to 46 hours. Our last group will do 47 through 56 hours. Okay, so we created some categories here, and we did this before with colors, and now we're going to have categories of hours studied. So hours studied, and again we can come up with frequency, and this will make a little more sense I think as we go through this. All right, and so the frequency here can be counted, but now we need a new tool for it. So we'll use count again. And last time we used count if, which allows us to use one condition, but this one we have two conditions. So our conditions here need to be, well, it's got to be greater than or equal to 2, but less than 12, less than or equal to 12. All right, so that's our criteria. So when we do this, again, we'll use our range, and our range is going to be study hours. All right, now let's define our criteria. Our criteria here has got to be what? Greater than 2. But you know what? Rather than say for this first value, rather than have to say that it's greater than 2, we could just say it's less than or equal to 12. So we're going to count all the values that are less than or equal to 12. Whoops. Little mistake there. That needs to be in quotes. Okay, and we find we have 9 values that are greater than or less than or equal to 12. All right? Now let's use our count if S, which means we have multiple set of conditions. And we have study hours. And this range has got to be, now it does have to be what? Greater than 12. All right, but then it can also be study hours. So here's our second condition. Less than or equal to 22. We made a mistake here. I made a mistake. We'll put that in the right place. Okay, so we have 9 in that category as well. All right, let's do the next one. So count if S, criteria, study hours. It's a range value again. And this one we want to be greater than, quotation marks, 22. And study hours has to be less than or equal to 34. What syntax we have here? So count if S, study hours, we forgot a comma there. There we go. So we get 7 there. Count if S, and it's going to be greater than study hours. Oops. Greater than 34. Less than or equal to 46. Okay, good job. No syntax errors there. And then the last one, use count if S, criteria, study hours. It's our range. And then this one's got to be what? Greater than 46. We forgot to put our quotation marks in there. All right, here we go. So we'll clean it up a little bit. So we got frequency. we can do the same thing we did before with relative distribution. Alright. Again, we would just take this value, and then we'll divide that by the sum of all of our values. And lastly, I'm hitting F4 to change that, remember. And we'll make that a percent, drag that down. And boldface this. Gotta wrap our text. Just widen out a little bit. Okay. Oh, we centered it too. Alright, so we've done this, and then once we did this, we can go ahead and make a column chart. And then lastly, we could make a pie chart, okay, to use some visualization with frequency and relative frequency. I want to do something else here, though, okay? Last thing I want to do is I want to calculate our cumulative frequency and our cumulative relative frequency. And I'll get to those in just a second here. Well, let me put it a different way here. I'll make sure I have enough space to do this. So I want to take my study data now, and let's see who studies 12 hours or less. Who studies 22 hours or less? Who studies 34 hours or less? 46 hours or less? Lastly, 56 hours or less. And by the way, that should be everybody studies 56 hours or less. Move this out a little bit. Alright. And here what we want to do is, again, we're going to find, we've worked with frequency, but I want to find cumulative frequency. That's going to be a little different. We have, again, a little different criteria that we're looking for here. And the other thing we're going to take a look at is cumulative relative frequency. Alright, those are our last two. And I'll widen those out a little bit. We will wrap the text, boldface them, and we'll make again a nice chart out of this, a nice table. All right. So we're looking at, so who studied 12 hours or less? Well, how do we calculate that? Well, that's going to be our cumulative relative frequency. Again, we can do that a variety of ways. One way we could do that was, again, with a count statement. We could say equals count, and then we need to put some criteria. And again, it'd be count if we have our range here now. And the range, again, is going to be our study hours. The criteria is going to be what? Less than or equal to 12. Alright. And I can copy this down to save myself a little bit of time. And I can go in here then and I can edit, so this will be less than or equal to 22. And then this one here is going to be what then? Less than or equal to 34. Less than or equal to 46. This one's going to be less than or equal to 56. Alright, now again we're going to do some data visualization. I have one more. We did over here, we did cumulative relative frequency or distribution. Let's do the same thing over here. Alright, so this would be this value divided by the sum of these guys here. I'll hit F4 to make those absolute. Alright, and I'll change that, whoops. K2 divided by the sum. Actually, that's not going to work. K2, what's wrong with my formula there? It's not the sum, is it? It's going to be divided by 29, right? That's the maximum number of participants I have. So let me change that to a percent. 31. Oh, I got one more thing I need to do here. Do I have that as an absolute? Yeah, we're absolute. We're okay. So we're going to use fill handle. And we have 29 participants who have studied 56 hours or less. And that's 100% of our population. And we can find some new data here as far as there's some, I guess, some new analysis that by the time we get to 34 hours, that's more than, well, it's 3/4 or more of our, almost 4/5 of our population. So that's a interesting statistics as well. So let's get to the data visualization piece here. So I'm going to insert, and I'm going to just take these values here, my cumulative frequency values, and I'm going to put in a two-dimensional column chart. Okay, pretty straightforward. But see how now we had, and think about where we were before. We were trying to show an enormous number of values here, and now we're showing 5 categories instead, and we're using, again, the term that we're using here is cumulative frequency and cumulative relative frequency, instead of trying to map every single data value there. All right, so pull that out, and that's one way we could show it. And that might be very, very helpful as well. We could also go through here and we could map our relative frequency. So here's a chart. I could change this chart too to something known as a histogram very easily. Let me show you how you make a histogram out of this. I can go in here and I can change my, format my chart area. That's not it. So what I need to do here, I need to select my values. So I select my bars here, and I can change I can format my series. I can just take away these gaps. And as soon as I do that now, I have a histogram. Okay? Or I can go back to, let me change this back again. Actually, I hit Control-Z to change it. Or I go in here and format my data. I can put gaps in here. I put 150% is where it was. Okay. All right, let me show you one other tool here. So something else I could map. Again, we'll go through this. If I go to chart this, insert, I'm going to do a line chart here. Excuse the phone. All right, so I got a line chart that's mapping my frequency, but we're going to make some changes to it. This is, by the way, this is known as an ogive. All right, a statistical, another statistical charting tool, and I need to change this up a little bit. So, for instance, my plot area, I shouldn't go above 100%. So I need to change that. Where do I change it? I think I actually change it over here on my axis. Format this axis, and I want this to be maximum value, not 1.2 but 1.0 or 100%. All right, and then down here, well, I want my values to indicate my different hours of study. And so I'll go into my data here, and I'm going to get rid of all this, and I'm going to select, actually it's not my right values, is it? The right values are over here. I don't have enough space, so we'll change my data values. Just select that. My data series. Whoop. Do it one more time here. Format, here it is, select data. I want to get rid of that, and what I want to choose here are these guys. Okay. Now, and again, I'm limited on space here. I'll make this, I'll slide this back a little bit. But I can certainly make a very, very nice graph this way, and no, I don't need this. That gives me a little more emphasis on this, but I can see old jive. And again, I'm trying to analyze some things here. So when I get to a certain part, like by the time I hit the 50% mark, by the time I get around 30 hours, nobody or very few people spend more than 30 hours a week studying. Okay, so this again, it's another method for us to go ahead and analyze our data. And again, we're working with nominal sets or groups of data here.